My mother replaced me with my stepdad's kids, so I left for good. A 27-year-old man, and this story is about how my relationship with my mom fell apart over the years, starting from when I was a kid. Growing up, I was really close to my mom. My parents divorced when I was 8, and I lived primarily with my dad. But weekends with my mom were the highlight of my week. We'd go hiking, work on little projects around her house, and she'd always remind me how proud she was of me. That's why what happened later hurt so much. Things started to change when I was 13. My mom started dating James, who had 2 kids from his previous marriage, Lucas and Lily. Lucas was 12, and Lily was 10 at the time. At first, I was excited because I thought I'd have more people to hang out with. But when they moved in, everything shifted. James decided to quit his job to focus on Lucas and Lily. My mom, who already worked long hours, had to take on even more overtime to make up for the loss of income. This meant she was around less. And when she was home, most of her attention was on making James and his kids feel comfortable. I tried to adjust, but it became obvious pretty quickly that I wasn't part of their little unit. Family dinners were always about what Lucas and Lily had going on. Lucas played soccer, and Lily was into cheerleading. My own accomplishments, like making the honor roll or winning a writing contest, barely got a nod. The vacations were planned around their schedules, and I started feeling like an afterthought. I remember one summer when I wanted to visit my grandparents, but James insisted we take a trip to the beach because Lucas had never seen the ocean. I guess whose plans got cancelled? High school was when things went from bad to worse. My mom had promised me a college fund. Something she'd been saving for since I was little. It wasn't going to cover everything, but it was supposed to help a lot. Then during my junior year, my dad told me that fund had been used to pay for Lucas' private school tuition. Apparently, Lucas had some trouble adjusting to public school, and James had convinced my mom that she needed a better environment. I didn't hear about this from my mom, by the way. My dad was the one who broke the news. When I confronted my mom, she said Lucas needed it more and assured me we'd figure something out for my college, but that never happened. My dad ended up taking out loans to help me while my mom barely contributed, claiming she was tight on money. It was around this time that my mom missed my high school graduation. Lily had a cheerleading competition the same day, and James convinced her that Lily's event was more important because her whole team was depending on her. I remember sitting in the auditorium looking out at the crowd and not seeing her there. She didn't even call until the next day, and when she did, she acted like it wasn't a big deal. By the time I went to college, I'd stopped visiting my mom's house regularly. Every time I went over, it felt like I was intruding. James would make these passive-aggressive comments about how I was so busy that I didn't have time for family. Dinners were always centered around Lucas and Lily's lives. And any attempts I made to talk about my own experiences were brushed aside. Once, I mentioned struggling with a tough class, and James responded by talking about Lucas' plans to study engineering. It was like I didn't exist. I tried to patch things up a few times. I'd suggest going out for lunch with just my mom, but somehow, James and the kids always ended up tagging along. If I ever brought up how I felt excluded, my mom would tell me I was too sensitive or that I was misinterpreting things. It felt like banging my head against a wall. The resentment built up slowly, but it really hit me when I looked back and realized how many promises my mom had broken. She used to tell me I was her priority, but her actions said otherwise. James had this way of making it clear that I wasn't really part of the family. One Christmas, I got a generic gift card while Lucas and Lily got these elaborate personalized presents. I tried to brush it off, but it stung. Eventually, I stopped trying. Every interaction with my mom felt like a reminder that I was less important than James's kids. She didn't notice how distant I'd become. Or if she did, she didn't care enough to do anything about it. By the time I graduated college, our relationship was barely hanging on by a thread. Looking back, I think the hardest part wasn't losing the relationship I had with my mom, it was realizing that she didn't see anything wrong with how things had turned out. She genuinely believed she was being fair even when her actions showed otherwise, and James, he always made sure I knew where I stood in their family on the outside looking in. This was just the beginning of the story. Things got even messier in the years that followed, but I'll get to that in the next update. Update 1. After college, my relationship with my mom had already dwindled to the occasional text or holiday card, but I was still holding on to a sliver of hope that things could change. That hope took a major hit when I found out about her 50th birthday party through photos on social media. It wasn't just a casual dinner or something low-key. It was a huge extravagant event complete with decorations, catered food, and what looked like a live band. James, Lucas, and Lily were all there along with plenty of extended family members. I wasn't. I called my mom to ask why I hadn't been invited. At first, she tried to brush it off, saying it must have been a mistake. Then she shifted the blame to James, claiming he had handled the guest list and must have forgotten to include me. Forgotten? The pictures told a different story. Every detail of the party screamed carefully planned, and yet somehow her own son hadn't made the cut. She promised to make it up to me, but I didn't hear from her after that. Not long after, Lily got engaged. Again, I found out about her engagement party through social media. This time, I didn't even bother calling my mom. I knew the drill. She would claim it was a small gathering or say James had organized it and forgotten me again. At this point, it felt deliberate, but I didn't have the energy to confront her. The final blow came when I realized I had been removed from the family group chat. I only noticed because a cousin mentioned something about a family barbecue I knew nothing about. When I checked, the chat was gone from my phone. I asked my cousin about it, and they seemed uncomfortable, mumbling something about how James had probably cleaned up the chat to make it more manageable. From then on, I found out about family events secondhand or through social media posts. My dad noticed how upset I was and encouraged me to address it directly instead of letting the resentment build. I wasn't sure it would help, but I decided to try one more time. One Saturday, I drove to my mom's house unannounced. James answered the door. He looked surprised and said it wasn't a good time because they were in the middle of something. I could hear laughter and voices coming from the backyard. Another gathering I hadn't been invited to. He didn't even invite me in. A few days later, I found out through my cousin that my mom had bought Lucas a brand new car for his birthday. This was the same woman who had claimed financial struggles when I was in college and could barely contribute to my tuition. The car was a shiny new SUV. The kind you'd expect a parent to give a kid as a reward for something big. Meanwhile, I had been working part-time jobs and taking out loans to make it through school. I started therapy around this time because I felt like I was carrying a weight I couldn't shake off. My therapist helped me unpack a lot of the hurt and confusion I'd been feeling. It became clear that my mom's behavior wasn't just careless. It was a pattern. Every decision she made seemed to prioritize James and his kids, while I was an afterthought at best. When I finally worked up the courage to call my mom and confront her about everything, she turned it around on me. She said I was jealous of Lucas and Lily and that I was blowing things out of proportion. It was like talking to a wall. She didn't acknowledge any of the specific examples I gave her, like the missed graduation or the college fund. Instead, she dismissed my concerns as me being too sensitive. I vented to a few close friends who were unanimous in their support. They agreed that my mom's behavior was unacceptable and encouraged me to set boundaries. For the first time, I started thinking about what that might look like. Thanksgiving was the final straw. My mom spent it with James's extended family and once again I wasn't invited. When I brought it up, she sent a weak apology via text claiming she hadn't realized I'd feel left out. It was a pattern, with her saying the bare minimum to smooth things over but never making any real effort to change. A few days later, James called me. He accused me of causing stress for their family and said I was being unfair to my mom. The audacity of that call was almost laughable. It was clear he wasn't interested in fixing anything. He just wanted me to stop rocking the boat. That's when it hit me. Every effort I'd made to repair the relationship had been one-sided. My mom wasn't interested in rebuilding what we'd lost. She was comfortable with the dynamic as it was, and I was the only one fighting to change it. It was draining, and I couldn't do it anymore. I decided to step back completely. I told myself I wouldn't reach out again unless she showed she was willing to meet me halfway. For the first time, I started focusing on my own mental health instead of trying to hold on to a relationship that clearly didn't matter to her. Update 2. After deciding to step back from my mom, I made it clear to her that I wouldn't engage unless she put in a genuine effort to include me as part of her family. I wasn't asking for much. Just the same basic respect and acknowledgement that Lucas and Lily got without question. I sent her a message explaining this and didn't hear back. Days turned into weeks and then months. She completely stopped reaching out. At first, it felt like a relief. No more half-hearted apologies or dismissive excuses. But as time went on, the silence was deafening. My dad was my rock during this time. He encouraged me to focus on the parts of my life I could control, my career, my friendships, and hobbies. With his support, I started putting all my energy into my work. It paid off. A few months later, I got a promotion that came with a pay bump and more responsibility. For the first time in a while, I felt like I was on solid ground, building a life that didn't revolve around seeking my mom's approval. Just when I thought things had quieted down, I started hearing whispers from extended family. James had been spreading rumors about me, calling me selfish and ungrateful. According to him, I was the one tearing the family apart. He'd conveniently left out any mention of the years of exclusion and broken promises. One of my cousins pulled me aside at a family event and confirmed what I'd suspected for a while. James had been steering my mom's decision since the beginning. He had allegedly encouraged her to focus on Lucas and Lily because they needed stability after their parents' divorce. I guess stability didn't extend to me. My therapist suggested writing a letter to my mom. The idea was to articulate everything I'd been feeling without the pressure of an immediate response. It wasn't about getting her to change. It was about getting closure for myself. I poured my heart into that letter, detailing every instance where I felt overlooked and replaced. When I finished, I didn't send it right away. I wasn't sure if I ever would. A few weeks later, a wedding invitation showed up in my mailbox. It was from Lily. The envelope didn't even have a personal note. Just the standard card with the date, time, and venue. It felt like an afterthought. Someone had realized they should invite me at the last minute to avoid looking bad. I decided not to go. I knew it would just be another event where I'd feel like an outsider. Declining the invite sparked another round of drama. My mom called me, accusing me of being petty and selfish. She insisted that I attend the wedding to keep the peace and said it wasn't fair to Lily to drag our issues into her special day. It was the same script she'd used for years. Everything was about keeping James and his kids happy. No matter how much it cost me. I told her I wasn't going to the wedding. Not out of spite, but because I didn't feel welcome. She didn't take it well. Things escalated when James took to social media. He posted a long passive-aggressive rant about ungrateful family members who can't put aside their egos for one day. He didn't name me directly, but it was obvious who he was talking about. Some extended family chimed in to agree with him, but if you messaged me privately to offer their support. One aunt told me she admired how I was standing up for myself and not letting James's antics control me. I leaned heavily on my friends and therapists during this time. They reminded me that I wasn't wrong to set boundaries even if it upset people. Their support helped me stay firm in my decision despite the guilt tripping from my mom and the online drama. Then came the moment of clarity. I realized I was done tolerating the disrespect and emotional manipulation. I wasn't going to keep bending over backward for people who clearly didn't value me. If my mom and James wanted to paint me as the villain, so be it. I wasn't going to waste any more energy trying to prove my worth to them. I started preparing for a final confrontation, not out of anger, but because I needed to say my piece once and for all. This time, it wasn't about salvaging a relationship. It was about getting closure and finally putting this chapter behind me. Update 3. Free. I decided it was time for a face-to-face meeting with my mom without James around. I wanted to lay everything out. Not for reconciliation, but to get closure. I called her and suggested we meet at a neutral spot. A cafe not far from her house. She agreed. Although I could tell she wasn't thrilled about it. When we met, I didn't waste any time. I started with the most glaring issues. The years of being excluded. The broken promises and the constant favoritism toward James's kids. I didn't hold back. Detailing every incident that had hurt me. From missing my graduation to using my college fund for Luca's private school. I listed it all. My mom sat there quietly, but her expression shifted from uncomfortable to defensive as I spoke. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said she'd done her best. She claimed it wasn't about replacing me but about making sure Lucas and Lily felt supported. She blamed James's influence for some of the decisions, saying he pushed her to prioritize his kids because they needed stability after their parents' divorce. I pointed out that her choices had destabilized my life, but she brushed it off, saying I had my dad to fall back on. That's when I brought up the financial issues. I asked her how she justified taking my college fund to pay for Lucas' tuition and then buying Lucas a brand new car years later. Her excuse? She thought I was better off with my dad handling my expenses. She said she assumed I wouldn't miss the money because I was smart and hardworking and would figure things out. I couldn't believe how easily she dismissed it as if it was no big deal. Before I could say anything else, James showed up. He must have known about the meeting because he walked straight to our table and sat down. Without missing a beat, he started accusing me of being ungrateful and selfish. He claimed I was attacking my mom and trying to guilt trip her. It was the same routine I'd seen for years, him swooping in to control the narrative and make himself the victim. At that point, I'd had enough. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and told them both I was done. I wasn't going to sit there and let James twist the conversation into another pity party for him and his kids. My mom called after me, but I kept walking. I wasn't going to give them any more of my time or energy. A few days later, I started getting messages from extended family members. Some of them had heard about the meeting and reached out to offer their support. A few even apologized for not stepping in sooner. Admitting they'd noticed how I was treated but didn't want to get involved. It was bittersweet. While it felt good to have some validation, it also highlighted how long I'd been dealing with this alone. Then, my mom sent me an ultimatum via text. She told me I needed to accept the family as it is or risk being cut off completely. It wasn't surprising, but it still stung. I didn't respond. Instead, I made the decision to go no contact with her entirely. I blocked her number and James's as well as Lucas and Lily's. I didn't want any more drama or back and forth. Of course James couldn't leave it alone. He ramped up his social media posts, making vague comments about entitled family members who don't know how to let go of the past. Some extended family joined in liking and commenting in agreement, but others messaged me privately to say they were on my side. I ignored it all. Engaging would only give him more fuel. Meanwhile, my friends and therapists became my lifeline. They reminded me that cutting ties was a form of self-preservation, not selfishness. I started focusing on my career again and picked up a new hobby, photography. It became a way to channel my energy into something creative and fulfilling. In one of my therapy sessions, my therapist pointed out how much progress I'd made. She said setting boundaries even when it's hard is a sign of growth. For the first time in years, I felt like I was taking control of my own story instead of letting my mom and James dictate it. A few weeks later, I finally decided to send the letter I'd written to my mom. It wasn't about reconciliation. I knew that ship had sailed. The letter was my way of closing the chapter, of saying everything I needed to without expecting a response. I mailed it and didn't look back. That letter marked the end of my emotional investment in the relationship. I wasn't waiting for an apology or hoping for change anymore. I was ready to move forward with or without my mom. Update 4. After I sent the letter to my mom, I didn't expect a heartfelt reply or any grand gestures, but part of me thought I might at least get a text or an acknowledgement. Nothing came. Days turned into weeks, and the silence only confirmed what I already knew. She wasn't going to change. The lack of response solidified my decision to move on. I started by cutting ties completely. I unfriended and blocked James, Lucas, and Lily on all social media platforms. I didn't want to see their posts or have them snooping on mine. It wasn't long before I heard about James's reaction. Extended family members started reaching out to let me know he was furious. He called me immature and accused me of trying to erase the family. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same man who had excluded me for years. Not long after my mom tried to mediate. She sent me a message not to reconcile, but to criticize me for creating unnecessary drama by blocking her husband and stepchildren. She claimed it was disrespectful and accused me of making things harder for everyone. I responded with a short firm reply, reiterating that I wasn't interested in maintaining relationships with people who didn't treat me as family. Her only response was a vague comment about how I'd regret cutting ties someday. I left it at that. Surprisingly, a few aunts and uncles reached out privately to express their support. They told me they understood why I had distanced myself and even shared their own frustrations with James's behavior over the years. One aunt admitted she'd always felt James had an agenda to push me out, but she hadn't wanted to get involved. Their messages were a small comfort. A reminder that not everyone in the family saw me as the villain James was painting me to be. Meanwhile, I threw myself into my work. The promotion I'd received earlier in the year had come with more responsibilities, but I found that immersing myself in my job was a great distraction. My efforts didn't go unnoticed. I started getting recognition from my boss, and a few months later, I was given the lead on a major project. It felt good to have something in my life that was entirely mine, untouched by the drama with my mom's family. Around this time, I reconnected with a few cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. It turned out I wasn't the only one who'd had issues with James. One cousin told me about a time when James had spread rumors about him after a minor disagreement, and another mentioned feeling sidelined during family events. Bonding over our shared frustrations brought us closer. And it felt like I was regaining a piece of the family I thought I'd lost. Of course, James didn't let up. Through mutual acquaintances, I found out he was spreading rumors about me. Calling me a bad son and claiming I was only cutting ties because I was jealous of his kids. I chose not to engage. Responding would only give him more fuel, and I was determined not to stoop to his level. In therapy, I talked about everything that had happened and how I was handling it. My therapist pointed out how much progress I'd made in setting boundaries and prioritizing my well-being. Hearing that helped me see how far I'd come since I first started therapy. I wasn't the same person who had spent years trying to win my mom's approval. I was finally putting myself first. My DDA was a constant source of encouragement throughout all of this. One evening, he told me how proud he was of my growth and resilience. It was a simple moment, but it meant the world to me. If nothing else, I had his unwavering support, and that was enough. An unexpected encounter brought some closure I didn't realize I needed. I ran into Lucas at a coffee shop near my office. He saw me froze and then quickly turned away as if he hadn't noticed me. It was awkward, but it made one thing clear. Our relationship was irreparable, and I was okay with that. As I reflected on everything that had happened, I couldn't help but think about my childhood. I'd been through so much, but I'd also grown stronger because of it. I recognized my own resilience and felt a sense of pride in how I'd navigated such a difficult situation. The opportunity for a fresh start came unexpectedly. My company offered me a chance to transfer to a new branch in a different city. It was a big move, but it felt like the perfect way to close this chapter of my life. I accepted the offer and began preparing for the next phase of my journey. This wasn't the ending I'd imagined when I was younger, but it was the one I needed. For the first time in years, I felt free. Update 5. Moving to a new city was exactly the reset I needed. My first few weeks were filled with unpacking, exploring the neighborhood, and settling into my new routine. It was refreshing to be in a place where no one knew my story, where I could just be myself without the weight of my family's drama hanging over me. I started attending networking events through work and even joined a rock climbing group on a whim. I wasn't great at it, but learning something new gave me a sense of accomplishment. The group was welcoming, and before long I was making friends who shared my love for adventure and personal growth. Each climb felt symbolic, like I was leaving my past behind one foothold at a time. A few months in, my mom broke the silence. She sent me a long email that caught me off guard. The tone was apologetic, but as I read through it, I noticed how much of it was focused on justifying her actions. She wrote about how hard it was to balance two families. How she thought I'd understand, and how she'd always tried her best. She acknowledged a few mistakes but framed them as necessary sacrifices for the greater good of her new family. It didn't sit right with me. The email felt less like an apology and more like an attempt to ease her own guilt. There was no real accountability. No acknowledgement of the damage her choices had caused. After reading it twice, I decided not to reply. Engaging would only reopen wounds I was working hard to heal. I left the email unanswered and moved on. Not long after, Lily called me out of the blue. Her wedding was approaching, and she wanted me to attend. She framed it as an opportunity to repair the family. The conversation was awkward, especially since we hadn't spoken in years. It felt less like a genuine olive branch and more like an obligation she was trying to fulfill. I politely declined, knowing my presence would only make things uncomfortable for everyone involved. Word of my refusal spread quickly. James, predictably, didn't take it well. I heard from a cousin that he was calling me selfish again and blaming me for creating division in the family. It was almost funny at this point. No matter what I did, I was always the villain in his narrative. Instead of letting it get to me, I took it as further confirmation that keeping my distance was the right choice. Meanwhile, things at work were going better than ever. I was put in charge of a major project that ended up being a huge success. At the company's quarterly meeting, I was recognized with an award for my contributions. It was a proud moment, and it reinforced that I was building something meaningful for myself, completely separate from my family drama. My dad flew out to visit me not long after. He'd been my biggest cheerleader throughout this entire ordeal, and having him there to celebrate my successes felt like the ultimate validation. We spent the weekend exploring the city, trying new restaurants, and reminiscing about how far I'd come. He reminded me that I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. During one of my therapy sessions, my therapist suggested that I might not need regular appointments anymore. She pointed out how much progress I'd made in managing my emotions and setting healthy boundaries. It felt like a milestone moment, a sign that I was truly moving forward. I decided to take a break from therapy, knowing I could always return if I needed to. As part of my journey toward closure, I donated an old keepsake from my mom to a local charity. It was a small sentimental item I'd held onto for years, but letting it go felt symbolic. Like, I was releasing the last bit of emotional baggage tied to our relationship. It was freeing in a way I hadn't expected. An unexpected message came from one of James's extended family members. They apologized for not supporting me sooner and shared that many people in the family had seen through James's manipulation for years. They admitted they hadn't spoken up because they didn't want to create conflict, but they wanted me to know I wasn't alone. It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot to hear someone else validate my experience. Around this time I started dating someone new. It was early days, but the relationship felt different, healthier. I realized how much more confident I was in setting boundaries and communicating my needs. Something I'd struggled with in the past. For the first time, I felt like I was building something that wasn't overshadowed by the weight of my family's history. As I looked back on everything that had happened, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the strength I gained. Cutting ties with my mom's family hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. I was happier, healthier, and more focused than I'd ever been. While I couldn't change the past, I was proud of how I'd taken control of my future. This was my story, not defined by the pain I'd endured, but by the growth and resilience that had come from it.